Tonight, King Charles outlines Labour's plan for national renewal. The government says the packed King's Speech with bills on planning, infrastructure and employment rights will be part of the battle against the snake oil charm of populism. Pressure over child poverty leads to Keir Starmer announcing a task force to try and tackle the issue, but he refuses to commit to scrapping the two-child benefit cap. So is the government's new agenda dodging one of the toughest choices? I'll be joined by the leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell. And as the government promises to take the brakes off to boost the economy, what could the impact be around the country? We're in Grimsby to find out. And laughing and joking together, it's like the general election battle never happened. We'll look at how Starmer and Sunak's relationship has suddenly changed. All that and more with Jonathan Gullis and Ayesha Hazarika, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. A King's Speech is where the government sets out its priorities for Parliament. And for Labour, this was the first opportunity in a decade and a half. So today was about expectation management. We were told it was about stability, serious solutions, determined, patient work. And in some areas, well, there's still a need for a bit of patience. Yesterday, we were talking about the pressure on the government to outline when it's going to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence. A review is underway. There's also pressure to scrap the two-child benefit cap. And today, just after the speech, another review on child poverty this time was announced. No date for either yet. But let's take you through what we did find out earlier, shall we? Here we go. This is the first one, because today's speech included legislation to streamline the planning process in order to build more homes, a ban on zero-hours contracts, the renters' rights to be put into law, and also, one they talked about a lot in the general election campaign, creating a national wealth fund as well. Public services now, let's have a look at what was said on public services. This is the big one. The rail industry going into public ownership, so renationalising the railways, Great British Rail to be set up. They also want to invest in a publicly owned green power company. That's Great British Energy, £8.3 billion investment into that one. And they want a crackdown on polluting water bosses as well. So new legislation that would make water bosses criminally liable for water pollution. On health and education, again, some big issues for the election campaign. This is one we heard an awful lot about, scrapping the VAT exemption for private schools, using that money, of course, for more teachers in state schools. They want to keep Rishi Sunak's ban on smoking and for younger people. And they also want to ban conversion therapy as well. Another big thing from the Labour government, they want to introduce a children not in schools register. So effectively a register of children who are continually not attending school. The King's Speech also pledged to rebuild neighbourhood policing. They want to make drink spiking a criminal offence, so strengthen the legislation around it. And they also want to set up a border security command. So that's their bid to try and toughen up the rules when it comes to illegal immigration, the illegal channel crossings of small boats. Our political editor, Beth, Rigby, has tonight's main report on Labour's stability speech.
This a big day for the Queen, her 77th birthday, for the monarch, only his second King's Speech to Parliament.
Morning, Prime Minister.
And for this man, the first time in 15 years that Labour's laid out a programme for government. July's general election opening the doors to a Labour administration. These two leaders, having swapped roles, now exchanging pleasantries. The new Prime Minister into the House of Lords to watch the monarch set out what lies ahead under Labour.
My government's legislative programme will be mission-led and based upon the principles of security, fairness and opportunity for all.
40 separate bills, one core priority.
Securing economic growth will be a fundamental mission.
To that end, a new planning bill to push through developments.
My ministers will get Britain building, including through planning reform.
Plans for new powers to metro mayors and local government, and promises of better rail and bus services.
My ministers will bring forward legislation to improve the railways by reforming rail franchising, establishing Great British Railways and bringing train operators into public ownership.
while also introducing employment laws to make working life better too.
My government will legislate to introduce a new deal for working people and enhance employment rights.
From the Lords back to the Commons, Keir Starmer making good on his pledge to govern for all, even the ex-PM and his deputy treated as friends, not foes, for now. But politics still at play in this place, the former Prime Minister keen for credit on the economy.
I understand well that the Chancellor is keen to paint as bleak a picture as possible, but I would just gently point out that this is not exactly what the facts say. The party opposite has inherited an economy that is already on an upward trajectory.
The new Prime Minister promising to put his change message into action.
Mr. Speaker, this government has been elected to deliver nothing less than national renewal, to stop the chaos of the past 14 years, turn the page on an era of politics as noisy performance, and return it to public service.
Pledging to deal with problems head on, but the PM already under pressure from his MPs to scrap the two-child benefit cap, ducking that decision for now.
No child should be growing up in poverty, and we will work across the House on that issue.
Keir Starmer looked like he was relishing every single moment of today, and so he should. He is one of the most powerful post-war prime ministers this country has ever seen, with a huge majority, a huge programme for government, and a huge opportunity to change this country in a way not seen since the likes of Tony Blair or Margaret Thatcher. But that scale of opportunity is matched by the scale of the task to win back voters' trust in government and to really deliver on the changes he's promised. A PM who wants a decade of national renewal, but his success depends on delivering economic growth, which, as many Prime Minister past will know, is far easier said than done. Beth, Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, let's get some analysis now, shall we? We're joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who's here with us. So, Sam, 40 bills in the King's Speech, that's a lot by historical standards. Anything stand out to you?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, Sophie, King's Speech Day is a funny day. It's a bit like a giant, antiquated, very expensive press release where the government gets its opportunity to tell you what its direction is by publishing, in this case, 40 bills that it hopes to get through Parliament in the next roughly year and a half or so. And we learned a couple of things, important things, big picture. One is just the reversal of the direction of travel. I was struck by the scale of the promise of state intervention on whether it is taking the railways or buses back into public ownership, whether it's the centralisation of the inspection of schools or curriculum. In lots of different areas, there are just things that a Conservative government for the last 14 years would never have done. Keir Starmer does not have much money. He is putting his faith in the state instead. There are questions, though, about exactly some of the things that we've been teased with, because you only ever get a tease in the King's Speech and all the accompanying documentation. What exactly is GB Energy? It was just a couple of hours ago that the minister in charge was sitting in this seat, not really being able to answer the question about what that body does. I think there are questions about what exactly has happened to some of the promises like votes at 16 or really how are they going to deal with the social care cap because that wasn't in evidence. You mentioned historical precedent in terms of King's speeches. I sometimes think the more important one is a year or two in. Then the Prime Minister's got his feet under the table, he understands the levers of power, and perhaps you can do something a bit more meaningful.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you were talking about things like votes at 16 or, for example, military spending. It feels like maybe we're going to need to be a bit more patient. And we may need to be a bit more patient when it comes to child poverty as well, because it's interesting what's going on with this cap on benefits. You can't have benefits for more than 2 children. A task force, what's going on there?
Well, I think you've got to look at the big picture. Keir Starmer campaigned in the election, for which he won an absolutely stonking majority, on a policy of no immediate reversal of the two-child cap on benefits. So here we are 2 weeks on. There should be no question that he has the mandate, that it is his mandate not to have to remove that cap immediately. Of course, Labour want to do it in the fullness of time. But today they seem to just dangle a little kind of something in front of people who want that cap done. I'm not quite sure politically why they're feeling the pressure. There's a task force with Bridget Phillipson and Liz Kendall on it, Work and Pensions and Education Secretaries. But here's the key point. Labour have always said they're not removing the child benefit, child benefit cap because of the cost. There is nobody from the Treasury on that. They are all aligned what they want to do. They want to get rid of it when there's the money. But that's a question for the Treasury. Today to Sky, Darren Jones, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, said, well, we didn't have £3 billion spare. So what's the point of having a commission when the problem is that there's no money left?
Well, we'll have to find out what the Commission says, won't we, Sam? Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, Deputy Political Editor, with a bit of analysis on the King's Speech, the legislative programme for the new government. Right, let's bring in a duo for this evening, shall we? The former Conservative Party Deputy Chairman, Jonathan Gullis, beaming now, you haven't got the responsibility of fighting that election campaign. And the broadcaster and Labour peer, Ayesha Hazarika. Great to have you both on the programme today. Ayesha, you were there, weren't you? You got your ermine on, you were your first King's Speech.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, it's sort of weird kind of bonkers Alice in Wonderland, but there's also sort of like a kind of weird reassurance about it. It's so completely British. I mean, it was very exciting. My first one there, I got a great seat, got a very good vantage point. And, you know, it's such a kind of British tradition, but the important politics... Oh, there
we go.
With the ermine.
That's one for the family album.
Very, very much. Honestly, the pressure to get the ermine, they only have a certain number of robes. It's like the Hunger Games in terms of trying to get your hands on one of these robes. But the important point is the politics of it. This is a historic moment. You know, this has been the first transfer of power to a Labour administration since 1997. We've got a relatively new king. We've got a very new Prime Minister. And for Keir Starmer and his team, this is very much sending out the signal. This is our legislative to-do list. And as Sam said, there's lots that isn't there. There's lots that they will want to do more over the parliamentary session. But this is sending out a big signal, building from the election campaign and saying, look, this is the kind of foundations upon which we want to move on to other things. I mean, the things that really jumped out to me are just so much, which a lot of people might find quite dull and boring and technical, but these are really important things if you do want to kind of fix a lot of things with Britain. You know, lots of stuff on transport, lots of stuff on infrastructure, lots of stuff on power, energy, planning, reform for building. I feel a lot of this is about getting Britain building again, but as you've said, this is the beginning of a political term, which we know will go on for 5 years, but this sends out signals of intent.
And Jonathan, now you obviously lost your seat, sorry to remind you.
But don't you worry, I've had time.
But that does mean that you can tell us what you honestly think of this. You know, you're not here in the pay of the Conservative Party any longer. So what did you make of the King's Speech?
First of all, Sophie, I never think I've been accused of always taking the line, believe me. I'm sure you can imagine the Chief Whip saw me more than he ever wanted to. But what I say is this, there was a large dollop of a different C word that I thought we saw today, and that was continuity. Continuity conservatism, in a large part, with some of the bills that were brought forward from the previous King's Speech and legislative agenda. With the change agenda, I think what we saw, and Sam referred to it earlier, was a lot of big state. We're getting probably some of the most left-wing stuff I've seen in my lifetime. I was born in 1990, albeit I don't look like it. So I think that a reality is I was quite shocked. Now, the challenge with the rail is when these franchises ended, essentially, but where's the money coming from to run these? Bus franchises, again, nice idea, popular on the ground, no doubt about that in Stoke, they'll like hearing that. But the local authority, where's the money going to come from to run these? So the problem is a lot of carrots being offered, but not enough substance behind it to back those policies up. But where Labour, I think, have done a very good job today is planning reform for me is clearly an area the Conservatives completely lost in terms of owning the issue, owning the matter of the day. And I think whilst we'll obviously want to scrutinise the detail, and of course there'll be elements that we'll want to potentially oppose or push, we shouldn't be wholesale just slamming it. I think some colleagues being quick out the gates to say they're going to concrete over the green belt is absurd. There is going to be an element of difficult discussions. Labour MPs are going to have to be honest with their constituents about saying that you may not want that field being built on, but this is in the national interest. And we've already seen the Green Party in complete disarray when it comes to pylons, particularly for renewable energy. So I think that Labour on planning, I actually backed a campaign with the Centre for Progressive Change on the sick pay, so I was very pleased to see that included as well. But one thing that matters to me most is education, and being a former teacher and a former minister for school standards. I'm a bit nervous about the curriculum review because it creates massive uncertainty in the education system. It will create a massive load of work if it's tinkered with too much. But where I think there is actually a blueprint for Labour to go to, Andy Burnham's MBAC, which he introduced in Manchester, which is really pushing the STEM agenda, obviously science, technology, engineering and mechanics, it's already there. I don't think you have to have a long review. I think you can take something off the shelf like that and offer a STEM back alongside your E-back and allow schools to decide whether or not they want to be specialists in a knowledge-rich curriculum or a vocational-rich curriculum.
It's interesting, just picking up on one thing you were saying there about the kind of big state, if you like, and sometimes I think this gets thrown around as a bit of a dirty word, but it does look like quite an interventionist, quite a muscular form of government. Ayesha, would you kind of accept that?
Yeah, and I think people on my side of politics are very pleased about that. I don't think we should be embarrassed about the state. I think it is good to have an active state. I think when you dismantle the state, and I think the last 14 years have proved that, I think when you hollow out the public realm, it does store up problems. And I actually think when people look at, for example, they see a transport system that just doesn't work. John was talking about houses not getting built. You look at the state of the water companies, and actually a lot of people, this is actually even across the political spectrum, ask the question, what is the government doing? I mean, that is a question. Now, you shouldn't have an over-bureaucratic, burdensome state, but I think an active state is what a lot of people want to see.
Just before I ask a question, I just want to say I'm really enjoying hearing the new consensus Jonathan Gullis. I quite know what's going on, whether you're looking for a job or auditioning for the Lords, but it's fabulous to see. It's a complete rebrand and refresh. I was talking to a Labour MP a couple of nights ago about what the divisions are going to be in the Labour Party. We've had endless divisions in the Tory Party for God knows how long. Was it going to be Blairite and Brownite, Reform, non-Reform? They said, no, it's going to be something else. It's going to be loyalists versus bedwetters. Now, what they meant by that is there are some Labour MPs, and they don't know how many, who are going to get spooked quite easily by issues, maybe like the two-child benefit cap, maybe like planning, who are going to get made nervous by their constituents and nervous by the media conversation and start to make Keir Starmer's life a bit more difficult. And then there are going to be others who are going to be loyalists that have their eyes on the job. I just wonder, we saw that pressure for the Tory party over the last, particularly at the back end of the last 14 years. I wonder, Ayesha, in particular, whether you think this is going to be something that the Labour Party hadn't seen before, but pressure from constituents is going to be a feature of this Parliament as Labour, as Keir Starmer forces MPs to justify things that will be unpopular at home.
I think that Keir Starmer and his team are really clear-eyed about the number of flashpoints that lie ahead. And the reality is the Conservative Party, after a very, very harrowing defeat, will take time to sort of regroup. So I don't think that they think that their major bit of opposition is actually going to come from the Conservative Party. It is actually likely to come from the public. And as you say, there are big issues. The Labour Party's now got this very broad coalition, and there are going to be issues which are flashpoint, whether it's planning in like kind of more rural areas. We know that foreign policy, for example, is going to be difficult. We know that people on the absolutely immigration. That we know that people on the left will sort of say, look, we want you to do more, we want you to borrow more, you've got this mandate. So I think they're very clear-eyed about the fact that sometimes they're going to be fighting on quite a number of fronts. So I think that is a reality that they expect to come. But I think they are cognizant of it. It's not like I think they expect, because they've got this massive majority, everything's going to be some sort of Pollyanna-esque kumbaya sort of situation. Already we've seen, for example, with the two-child policy, lots of people are speaking out about that. I had Rosie Duffield on my own radio show. She said, if there was an amendment, I'm going to vote against my own government. I want to scrap this. So I think they are aware of this, and I think they understand that political management within their own very large parliamentary Labour Party is going to have to be something, and it will take up a lot of their time.
It's very difficult. I think the Conservative Party never really came around to the fact that it had such a broad coalition in 2019, and that was partly not helped by the fact that we had the global pandemic, where MPs were not able to mingle in the tea rooms, mingle in the corridors, talk about the differences in their constituencies. I'm someone who is fiscally hawkish Conservative, but in my constituency, they would want to see a much more economically interventionist government. But where I was able to win over voters in 2019 was very much on the social heart and mind issues, Brexit being one of those for the majority of voters, immigration, again, in that area. So I think it will be a huge challenge for Labour going forward. And Ayesha is correct that the Conservative Party is going to have to go away and really fix itself. And I personally would like to see a new leader installed ahead of the next budget. But what I will say is that I think that when it comes to the public pressure, that will be telling. In Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough, they've got a local plan going through. There's a lot of opposition to certain sites. This will be a big test for those local Labour MPs.
I'm interested, my ears pricking up, that you want to hear a new leader installed by the next budget. Anyone you got your eye on for their leadership?
So I'm going to be fully supporting Priti Patel, obviously announcing that she will be running for the leadership. I think that Priti has served under William Hague in his private office during opposition, so she knows what it's like, particularly when you've had a very heavy defeat. She served under both Cameron, May and Johnson in government, didn't under Rishi or under Liz. And whilst there were disagreements and there were times when she did rebel on certain votes, she put the party first and didn't come on the TV airwaves and spout off, didn't write articles in the Telegraph 2 days before the general election was being polled, like Suella Braverman so helpfully did. So I think that ultimately, I think she's the grown-up in the room who can really bring that party together, understands what it takes, has been a party member now for over 30 years, an activist on the ground, and I'll be fully backing her.
She's been a bit of a submarine. Is that a problem, or...?
No, I think actually at the end of the day, that shows that she's been doing the right thing. Where she's had disagreements, her and I, for example, both rebelled on the Windsor framework, but I wasn't on TV studios, neither was Priti, and I think that shows that where she had disagreements, where she was a Spartan under May, she wasn't out and about trying to tarnish the brand of the Conservative Party, but she also stood by her principles, and that's something that we're going to need very much.
Well, be interesting to see. That's definitely someone coming out there banging the drum for Priti Patel. That leadership race well and truly underway. Thanks both very much indeed. Well, the Commons leader, Lucy Powell, has summed up the King's speech as a packed legislative agenda. She's with us now. It certainly was packed legislative agenda, wasn't it? 40 bills. Anything in particular that kind of stood out to you?
Well, obviously, I was kind of key part of drawing all that together and prioritising what we were doing. We've been working on that for months. So, I mean, yeah, some of the people said I was there beaming today. I could see Ayesha near me with her full robes on in the Lords. But I was beaming. It was a very emotional day to actually hear the King talking about a Labour government's legislative agenda after 15 years. So, you know, really, really proud of quite a lot of it. I mean, look, there's some stuff that's not in there that we'll get to. But particularly for me, it was keeping our promises on some things that I think people have been let down about over years. So Martin's Law and Hillsborough Law were things I was very happy to see.
Let's talk about some of the stuff that wasn't in there. First of all, votes for 16-year-olds. Is that going to happen?
It's a manifesto commitment. We're still committed to that.
Why wasn't it in the King's speech?
Well, because we had to prioritise things in this. As you know, this is for our first session.
But it's quite. I don't understand why. I understand some things. You know, haven't got the money to do it right now. But why wouldn't you do that one?
Well, because we haven't got the parliamentary time to do absolutely everything. So what we've prioritised is the things that we need for that early delivery on our missions. That's why you see things like planning reform in there, the National Wealth Fund, setting up GB Energy, because unless we do those early, they won't deliver later on in the Parliament. And obviously, electoral reform is something we need to do in time for another general election, for example.
So you can say that 16-year-olds will be able to vote at the next election then?
That's our commitment, and that's, I'm sure, one that we will stick to, absolutely.
Another thing, obviously, that controversially wasn't in there was scrapping the two-child limit on benefits. We know, of course, some people are very upset about that, and they feel that it's pushing children into poverty. 1.7 million children, I think the latest figures show. Is this something that the Labour Party wants to do, or that it just can't afford to do? What is it?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's controversial. It's not in our King's speech. It wasn't in our manifesto.
Oh, come on.
It's
you
not
know
expected.
It is controversial.
Well, no, I mean, look, I think it's a separate thing about the topic itself, but I don't think there was an expectation it would be in our King's speech because it wasn't in our manifesto. It's not something we said we would do, and therefore there was an expectation it would be in that today. But look, we're a Labour government. We are absolutely committed to driving down child poverty and to get to a place where the last Labour government got to, which was child poverty almost eliminated. And now it's obviously at record highs. And that's why we've announced this cross-government cutting task force to look at all the issues around child poverty, because it's not just an issue of benefits, it's an issue of housing, education,
early years, energy bills, uniform costs.
That is obviously,
huge amounts of things.
I completely accept that, but specifically, the benefits thing, it's not just me saying that, it's Gordon Brown saying it, it's the Child Poverty Action Group saying it, it's the Resolution Foundation who's saying it. They all say this is an issue. If it is an issue, why isn't a Labour government committing to do it? You didn't even mention it in the task force email that went out.
Well, because we said before the election we weren't going to be able to do it because the fiscal situation, the financial situation is so dire. So one thing that really does drive up poverty for ordinary working families, especially those at the lower end of the economic scale, is when the economy crashes. It's the poorest in society who pay the heaviest price when the economy crashes. We saw that in the era of austerity after the last global financial crash. We saw that after the run on the pound from the Liz Truss crashing the economy with that fiscal event. So unless your sums add up and therefore you have a run on the pound and the economy gets tanked, the people who pay the heaviest price for that are not those of us who are comfortably off. We can weather those storms. It's the poorest, and we're not going to do that. We're not going to crash the economy. We're going to have a fully costed plans. That all of our plans in the manifesto, all of our plans in the King's Speech are fully costed. And at the moment, that is a cost that we can't afford. But we are committed to tackling child poverty and looking at all of those issues across the piece.
You mentioned Liz Truss there. I can't help but ask you, she complained, didn't she, about being referenced by you guys for crashing the economy, as you put it. Has that reference now been removed then? What's gone on?
I think it has, because it's a sort of civil service document that's produced alongside the King's Speech. But obviously, in what we can say as politicians about it, remains the same.
So it was a mistake then?
Which is that we are bringing in that fiscal responsibility bill. I think that's going to be introduced to Parliament this week, in fact. We've got a number of bills actually ready to be introduced this week. We're going to make sure that future major fiscal events are always subject to that OBR analysis so that we don't have the situation we had with that Liz Truss mini-budget, which was done deliberately as a so-called mini-budget to evade that scrutiny, and it crashed the economy.
You accept that you shouldn't have put it in the civil service document then?
Well, I mean, look, Simon Case has made his ruling on that, but as I say, there's plenty of sort of political commentary around it.
Sam, I don't know if there's anything you want to ask.
One of the big things today that you're embarking on, launching, creating, is GB Energy. Mm-hmm. But I've got to be completely honest, the description goes further today than I was expecting. You're going to be operating energy projects as well as investing in them. How on earth is any of this going to work? Even the Minister herself couldn't really explain earlier.
We're establishing GB Energy as a company. It will obviously be a company that we set its objects for it as a government. We're the sort of only shareholder in it, but it will be a company that is run by a chairman who will then appoint a chief executive and have a board. And they will have objects, if you like, objectives to invest in clean energy projects around the UK.
In investment. The revelation today was it's going to effectively run, or it's going to operate, that was the word in the government document, energy projects. How on earth is that going to work?
Produce energy, yeah. I mean, it's investing in projects that will produce energy, whether that's offshore wind, whether that's nuclear, exploring tidal and so on. Obviously, it's not just investing in those, it's a company that will then realise those. So it will realise new offshore wind projects, new onshore wind projects, which can now happen because we've lifted the moratorium on that. So in the same way...
So it's not running? You don't think it's running? It's just investing?
It's not going to be supplying energy to your home or my home. It is going to be producing energy. It is an energy production company. That's always been really clear.
OK. How did it feel then? 14 years, first Labour King's Speech.
Well, as one of the doorkeepers said to me afterwards, he said, "Don't play poker, Lucy," because you were beaming the whole way through that. And I sort of, having worked on it for such a long time, and I was fortunate enough to be part of the procession, it's part of my role, I was determined to experience it and actually listen to it with fresh ears as a sort of ordinary punter rather than sort of overanalyzing it and remembering how I felt hearing that first Queen's Speech, as it was then in 1997, as a young sort of political activist. And I was beaming because it was great to hear, and it's so incredible that after all this time, 15 years, to actually be able to change the laws in this country in the interests of my values, of what we've been elected to change, and to deliver some of those promises that people like Martin Hett's mum, Fegan, the Hillsborough families and others have been waiting for so long, was incredibly powerful.
That Martin Hett case, obviously one that's moved you an awful lot, as you would expect as a Manchester MP. Thank you very much indeed, Lucy Powell, there. Well, the King's Speech is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening, with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, that's Claire Ellicott. Now, Grimsby, one of Sky News' target towns, returned to the Labour fold at the election, but it was hard fought over and Reform came second ahead of the Conservatives. We've been back there to ask if the government's plans to intervene more directly in the economy in today's King's Speech could have the opposite effect.
Building up the economy. Fixing a housing crisis.
Thank you so much.
Where the new government prioritises spending, impacts lives.
It's so expensive.
Holly still lives at her mum's with her daughter, saving with her fiancé to buy.
Rents, I've looked between about 750 and to 1,000 plus. Yeah.
And that's completely unaffordable for you?
Yeah, completely unaffordable. My partner probably will be able to rent in probably about a year and a half, because that's probably when the car's going to be paid off. But then it's like finding somewhere that's affordable.
She welcomes the government pledge to get Britain building. So does Ellie.
Life happened and we had to spend money that we'd saved.
Unable to get a mortgage yet.
We're comfortable, but we can't do anything extra than just the everyday essentials and stuff. But our rent at the moment is £900 for a 3-bed terrace.
Grimsby's not immune to the national shortage of housing. This estate took 6 years. Developers welcoming reform of planning laws.
Reforming planning law is actually just one part of it.
It is only one part of it, because it's all well and good getting consent for an extra 1.5 million houses or whatever you need. You've got to actually deliver them. So to do that, you've then got to go on and get them built. And that requires a construction industry to do that. And then you have to have the depth of tradesmen and the depth of up-and-coming tradesmen.
Do you not think we have it at the moment?
No, I think we've got a shortage of skilled tradespeople in the industry.
All of it part of a plan to get the economy going.
This government doesn't want to borrow more, and it doesn't want to cut spending either, and therefore the only way to deliver on public services and improving standards of living is through economic growth.
But it's a balance, as with everything, including on increasing workers' rights.
I have to accept that in order for my business to succeed, like all businesses, big and small, your employees have to be well looked after. So really, I'm not against it. So,
but the knock-on impact is costs.
Yes, it might be inflationary.
Promises made with growth key, but it may be a long time before they deliver. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, away from the King's Speech, some key economic data came out today which will impact the leeway the new team in the Treasury will have moving forward. The inflation rate was unchanged today at 2%, meaning it's still low, but it didn't drop further like most had expected. And crucially, it suggests the chances of an interest rate cut next month are less likely. Our data and economic editor, Ed Conway, explains.
We had the latest data out on inflation, the cost of living. It just shows you how fast prices are going up, sometimes going down in the economy. This is the rate of inflation. You can see the cost of living crisis there, inflation up in double digits, and now it's come down to there, 2%. It was 2% last time around, and in June it was 2% again. Good news in that that's where the Bank of England is trying to keep inflation, but bad news in that it was actually expecting it to come down a little bit more than that. And if you look specifically at the kinds of measures of inflation, because there's the overall measure of inflation, which is goods and services, but the bank is also focusing on this, services inflation in particular. It thought that that was going to come down even more, maybe to be about 5.1% now. In fact, it's still running at an annual rate of 5.7%. So you know, when the bank is making its decision about interest rates, and that's where interest rates are right now, 5.25%. They have a big decision in August about whether they're going to start to cut and finally bring down the cost of living and bring down the cost of borrowing. Have a look at this, OK? Out there in markets right now, people are constantly making bets about what they think the bank is going to do, OK? So this line is showing you what they think the probability of the bank cutting interest rates in August is going to be. It's just the last few days. It was 50% before the inflation data came out. Then the data comes out, and look at what happens to this line. It goes down. So down from 50% to only a 35% chance of a cut. So a big fall there, suggesting that it's not necessarily in the balance, it's not necessarily 50-50. It actually looks less likely that they're going to cut interest rates in August. Even so, the cost of living crisis is at least abating, with inflation back down at the Bank of England's target.
Ed Conway there, our data and economics editor. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Foes to friends or faux friends? We'll be looking at the politics of putting politics aside. Hello, welcome back. Well, today was the first day opening of Parliament that the Conservatives have watched from the opposition benches for 14 years. Earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Science Secretary, Andrew Griffith. Very good to have you on the programme. What's your reaction to the King's speech?
Well, there's a lot in it, clearly. This is the moment when the rubber hits the road. The government, with its mandate of sorts, lays out its agenda for my party, the job now is to be a constructive official opposition. The country needs that. The government's got the lowest mandate of any modern-day government, about 34% of the vote. It's actually 35 bills, I'm told. So there's more bills in this than their percentage share of the mandate. And, you know, I've observed you've got some of Labour's greatest hits here. You know, you've got nationalisation of railways, you've got a state-owned energy company, you've got a lot more red tape, employment legislation. They're even trying to legislate and regulate AI, which is an emerging technology.
Interesting, one of the things that they are really going for is growth. Kind of gives me flashbacks to when you were in Liz Truss's government, and that's what you were trying to do as well, wasn't it?
Well, I think it's what every government tries to do, is to grow the prosperity of people in the United Kingdom, give them longer, higher quality lives. There are some inconsistencies, and I'm not saying this is the first time you've ever seen those, but you've got, on the one hand, you know, a push for planning deregulation, saying that's going to help growth, but you've also got the reimposition of top-down command and control targets. You have got some things that are going to make it very hard to mobilise investment. You've got that vindictive attack on private education. We've heard about non-dom tax. Well, no, if you're trying to get growth, Sophie, you need the capital to do that. We all operate in global economies.
But just talking about planning, which is something that you tried to do as well, it does feel that, you know, they are really driving on that. They're prepared to override local concerns. Growth is everything. That's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, we all want the homes the nation needs, for sure. But on the one hand, I mean, I'm just illustrating that, you know, there's a tension here. On the one hand, they talk about devolution. That's putting communities in control, something I support. But if you believe in communities having the last word and making the decisions, you don't also impose top-down command and control targets from Whitehall. That's just one of the tensions that, as the opposition, it'll be our job, constructively where we can, but to tease out exactly where they come on this. You talk about planning, but actually the place where homes are needed the most and have built the least is London. And you didn't need a Labour government because you've had a Labour mayor with all of the planning powers in London. They could have got on and done that. So to me, it says it's not just about, you know, oh, that it were, but it's not just about pulling one single lever. These are often quite complex issues.
The other thing that we're hearing loud and clear from this Labour government is effectively saying that the inheritance that they've got is terrible, right? Whether it's prisons, whether it's the economy, across the board. Do you accept that you've left a poor inheritance to this government?
Absolutely not. All governments, not every government gets things right all the time. But I think the one thing, particularly as it relates to the economy, is that the OBR makes the government books an open book, right? The data is out there. Paul Johnson says that, you know, no government can come on in because of the way the OBR lays out what the economic state of the government finances looks like. And they've got a government that, unlike that note where we came in and it said there's no money left, inflation's now back down to 2%, having been 11%. Unemployment's around 4%, one of its lowest rates in history. And the UK economy, although all economies are struggling with the growth, the UK economy is growing the fastest of any G7. So you are going to see that. We heard a little bit of that from Keir Starmer today. They're going to try and throw up their hands, say things are much worse, as an excuse for trying to raise taxes. But that is not right. The British people should not be fooled by that. The OBR publishes all of the states of public finance.
We also see the state of public finances with, you know, the huge levels of debt, for example, as well, don't we? It's not all a rosy picture.
No, and I'm not saying that at all. But what the picture is, Sophie, is exactly the picture it was 6 weeks ago and 8 weeks ago and 10 weeks ago, because of the way that the OBR publishes in clear and plain sight the state of public finances. Both parties presented a set of balanced decisions at the election. So I think the one thing, and it's particularly true of the economy, but there's lots of government data on a lot of states of the government-delivered public services, but particularly true on the economy, where you've got the independent OBR. Nobody should be coming in and saying it's worse than we thought. It's exactly the same as it was at the start of the election.
Andrew Griffith there, the Shadow Science Minister. Well, Conservatives who lost their seats at the election have gathered at one of the party's favourite spots in central London tonight, the Carlton Club, for a drinks reception hosted by Rishi Sunak. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is there. John, what's happening?
Well, there's been what's really a wake taking place here at the Carlton Club, the Holy of Holies for the Tory party. Of the 250 or so Conservatives who lost their seat in the election, about 120 of them were here to hear Rishi Sunak deliver a massive apology. I'm told he used the word sorry no fewer than 8 times. Now, amongst the MPs, there was some bitterness, not particularly directed publicly at Mr Sunak, but anger about calling the election in July. Former MPs I spoke to said that they weren't ready. They had to spend a lot of their own money on leaflets and so on. The party was just not ready. They blamed also, some of them, the policies of Rishi Sunak's government. They obviously were very bitter about the fact that reform took thousands of votes off them. Some MPs with seats of 20,000 or so majorities losing by a few hundred, largely because of reform getting 6,000, 7,000 or 8,000 against them. So a really very gloomy mood, really, and recriminations, anger at the timing. But I think we can hear from a couple of the MPs I spoke to a short time ago, just at the end of this event.
And so I think there was probably about 120 in there. It was very teary at times, but Rishi said sorry for the fact that the election result wasn't as he had planned. And then we had the chairman of the party and the chief whip basically saying, we now need to rebuild. We've got great expertise in the room, more expertise in this room than we've got at Parliament. We need your help.
But look, it's not about what's going on here. It's about what's going on out there and the interests of the people of the country. And, you know, the Tory party has not served them well because we've allowed Labour to take over. You know, I wish the new government well. I really genuinely hope they do well. But I fear this is going to be a calamity.
Well, that was Adam Holloway, who lost his seat in Gravesham in Kent. You also heard there from Nigel Evans, a Ribble Valley MP for many years, who was a deputy speaker. Both shocked to lose their seats. I spoke to people like James Sunderland, who lost to Labour in Bracknell. That was a shock result. That wasn't expected. And one of the others was Steve Tuckwell, who lost his seat when he won the by-election created by Boris Johnson leaving Parliament in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. So really a sad event, like a wake, really. The PM looked pretty sombre when he left here, actually, surrounded by some of his Yorkshire allies, Kevin Hollinrake and Julian Smith, Yorkshire MPs, neighbouring constituencies. And so a gloomy affair, the really grim mood amongst Tory MPs. They didn't confront Rishi Sunak to his face, but talking privately to me, off camera, if you like, pretty bitter about the fact that Rishi Sunak went for a July election. The campaign was a disaster, they reckon, and of course Tory policies, they were critical of policies on the small boats. Why didn't he wait until the summer, was one that's a lot of the MPs said. Criticism policy on net zero and so on. So a pretty bitter mood here, a wake really of 120 or so Tory MPs who lost their seats on July the 4th.
Thank you very much indeed. John Craig there outside the Carlton Club. Right, let's bring in Jonathan and Ayesha. Jonathan, I feel like I should go to you first because you're actually at the event as a former Conservative MP who lost your seat. I should first say thank you for leaving early to get to the studio.
Power walked to get here on time.
What was the mood like? Do you agree with John's assessment?
Look, obviously there is sadness. There's a lot of colleagues in there, and it's actually sort of quite striking in that moment when you realise and you see the breadth of MPs. 2019 is all the way back to people back in '97 who had lost their, who held on then, but sadly couldn't hold on now. Ultimately, look, people like myself, the polling was so obvious and so consistent. The writing was on the wall. I spent a lot of time, well before the election was called, mentally preparing for the reality, whilst also being prepared to make it as tough a battle as possible. I think the question that will always linger with colleagues is why the 4th of July? That's a question I've never really had a clear answer on, and I don't think we necessarily will. And I think that's something we just have to learn to accept, that a decision was made, a very poor decision, clearly. There's an awful lot of inspection of what happened in Conservative campaign headquarters. It didn't feel like it was ready. It may have been that the Prime Minister's team was ready, but it certainly didn't feel that in CCHQ. And again, that's questions. And I think actually there's a lot to learn from the Starmer playbook for the Conservatives right now, is to look inward, understand the public anger towards us, understand what it is that we need to do to become a party machine again, a campaigning party machine, and therefore, over time, build trust bit by bit with the public that when we're in opposition, at times we will oppose, and other times we'll build consensus and work in the national interest, and ultimately then come up with a policy platform where we'll have to convince voters, if they put us back in office, we would actually deliver. And again, the King's Speech and some of the stuff that Labour's doing, which might be controversial in some local communities, learning that lesson of if you get in power, you've got to do some of the ugly stuff, but important stuff out the gate, because you'll have time to explain to the public why that was important.
Ayesha, I mean this in the nicest way, but you're quite used to opposition.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long spell in opposition.
What would your advice be to the Conservative Party?
Well, I mean, I think Jonathan is speaking a lot of I quite like the new Jonathan Gullis, actually, I have to say. I like the sort of rebrand. I agree with a lot of what Jonathan said. And look, conversely, in the spirit of being bipartisan, which is very much the mood of this discussion tonight, I think there's a lot that Keir Starmer can learn, particularly from where the Conservatives went wrong. So you take Boris Johnson's stunning win back in 2019, where people like me on that night thought, my goodness, Boris Johnson's probably going to be in for another 10 years. I mean, I honestly thought that at
I thought
the
I'd
time.
be there for a decade.
Well, I mean, that's what the... So I think the lessons to learn, conversely, for us and what happened to the Conservatives is never take the electorate for granted. Never, what the electorate have shown is that they can be angry. If they turn against you, they will figure out how to boot you out.
Tactical voting's here to stay.
Absolutely, tactical. Like, neither of the big parties can be kind of comfortable, but also that thing about delivering. You are judged. I think Clement Attlee said this, you're judged not on what you try to do, but you're judged on what you succeed at doing. So delivery, and not delivery in an indulgent, academic, wonkery kind of way, delivery that real people can feel and they can see it, whether it's food on the table, whether it's, fuel going into their cars, like absolute everyday things. It's not enough kind of explaining to the public that, you're doing well. The public will have to sort of feel it. And I think the big lesson to learn, and we touched on it earlier with the discussion with Sam, is that yes, there's going to be flashpoints along the way in terms of political management. That's not because Labour MPs are deliberately being difficult, it's because difficulties will come up with the constituents, the public. But the one lesson to really learn from the Conservative Party, who enjoyed a big spell of power, is that if you get indulgent about having internal divisions, the public pick up on it, you get addicted to the chaos, you get addicted to the drama, you get addicted to the kind of soap opera, not about delivering for the public, but about your own internal spats, and the public hate it.
Yeah.
Absolutely hate it.
I'm loving the agreement, by the way, on the panel.
And what I will say, by the way, is that it's also a tough night because at the end of the day, there's a lot of colleagues who've lost their jobs and now frantically looking for work. And I think there's a human element. And what I will say is, in my time in Westminster, packing up my office, in my time in and around here, the amount of people from the SNP, Labour, Liberal Democrats and the Conservative Party all consoling and supporting and asking how each other are, it's the kind of thing that doesn't get shown, sadly enough, in politics, but it's certainly happening. And it shows, actually, that despite the battles that we sometimes have on TV or in the chamber, actually, we're all humans and we all care for each other.
Right, hold that thought, which links me nicely to what we're going to look at next. Bitter, fractious, acrimonious. They're some of the cleaner words you could use to describe the relationship between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. But looking at them today, you'd think they could be best of mates. So briefly putting aside years of insults, including, of course, in the election campaign. Oh, I love it. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I really remember the similar moment with Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, where they just obviously hated each other, making that walk where they're forced to do during the King's Speech. But what do you think, Ayesha? I mean, it looked like they were getting on pretty well.
Well, look, fundamentally, Rishi Sunak, and I may disagree with Rishi Sunak's politics, and Tories may disagree with Keir Starmer, but they're both fundamentally decent people, right? They've come into politics with good intentions. They're patriots. They care about this country. They've got different ideas about how society and things should be organised, but they did want the best for this country. And I think sometimes we have a a climate in politics, you know, dare I say in our media, definitely in social media, where there is a kind of a behaviour which is rewarded for hatred and making an enemy of somebody. And it's not like you're allowed to just disagree with somebody on one thing. We have, particularly in social media, it's like if you disagree with somebody on one thing, you've got to literally come after them and like bring them down. And I think what that kind of shows is they're both decent men. Yes, they had different ideas. They went hard. They fought each other hard in election campaign. Politics should be a really spirited competition of ideas. What it shouldn't be is this dark, toxic, nasty stuff we just saw in America recently. There's got to be a better way of doing our politics.
And I guess there's actually very few other people who would understand the pressures of being the leader of a party or being Prime Minister as well. I thought it was interesting, Jonathan, you were saying that you used to chat a bit with Keir Starmer about football.
Yeah, so look, after PMQs, where obviously I always had my same spot, and Keir and I used to wave at each other before it all kicked off. On the way out, I was just asking about Arsenal. I'm brought up a Fulham fan. My nan indoctrinated me. So we'd catch up with each other on our respective football teams. And look, there's a lot of acrimony. One of my best friends in Parliament is David Linden, an SNP, former SNP MP. You know, Stephen Flynn came and asked how I was doing when I was packing up my office. These are people that you'd think we despise each other. Actually, it's very different. It's a small chamber. The corridors are narrow. The offices are right on top of each other. You're constantly in and around each other. And I think that actually, if I learned two lessons, there was the referendum in Scotland in 2014, and then there was the Brexit referendum in 2016. And I think that you either got to agree with me or disagree with me, these camps that we ended up being bedded in, which I don't think the 17 to 19 Parliament of all parliamentarians helped because they ended up bedding into that narrative. I think that continued into the last Parliament, and there was this feeling sometimes of, I can't be seen to agree or get on because that will mean that I'm described in the Tory circles as a wet or as a Lib Dem in disguise, or if I agree with Nigel, I must be a right-winger and a fascist. And this is all toxic stuff that we need to move away from.
And I really hope that with this new turnover of Parliament, it's quite unusual to get this big a churn. Yes. I hope it does give everybody just to have a chance to have a wee bit of a reset in terms of, you don't have to do this performative, I hate everybody. You can try and, find some common cause.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Famous last words.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to see a bit. I like a little bit in the chamber. I like a little bit in the chamber, but as long as it's kept in the chamber and realised it's always in good nature. PMQs, you've got to have that.
Love it. Thanks both very much indeed. That is it from us tonight. What a day. I will see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is a UK Tonight with Matt Barbette for more dissection of what the King's speech really means. We'll see you tomorrow.